Sometimes life moves in such strange, almost unbelievable ways that it genuinely feels like some higher force is quietly rearranging everything behind the scenes. It feels like moments, people, and emotions are being aligned in ways we don't immediately understand. And when you hear a line like, "This is not a joke, God is aligning you with your soulmate right now," it stops sounding like a dramatic quote. It starts to feel personal. It feels like it is speaking directly to that hidden part of your heart that has been waiting, hurting, healing, and growing all at once. Because deep down, you know that meeting a soulmate is not always about perfect timing or easy circumstances. Sometimes it is about crossing paths when everything is complicated. Sometimes it happens when one of you is already tied to a life that cannot simply be undone. When love arrives, it does not always feel like happiness. Sometimes it feels like a quiet storm. It shakes your beliefs. It tests your strength. It forces you to choose between what your heart feels and what your values demand. And that is where the real meaning of alignment begins. Not in the fantasy of being together, but in the painful beauty of recognizing someone who feels like home, and still choosing not to break the world around you just to hold on to them. Because true connection does not always mean possession. Sometimes it means distance. Sometimes it means restraint. Sometimes it means silent understanding. It means knowing that this person was sent into your life not to stay forever in the way you imagined, but to transform you. To awaken parts of you that you did not even know existed. To teach you what unconditional love actually looks like. Not the kind that demands or chases or destroys, but the kind that respects, protects, and sometimes lets go, even when every part of you wants to hold on. And that is what makes this alignment so intense. Because it does not come with clarity. It comes with confusion. It comes with late-night thoughts. It comes with unspoken words. It comes with a constant internal battle between desire and dignity. You start questioning everything. You wonder why now? Why this person? Why in these circumstances? And slowly, you realize something deeper. Maybe the timing is not wrong. Maybe it is just not meant to be easy. Maybe the purpose of this connection is not to complete a story. Maybe it is to deepen your soul. Maybe it is to make you understand that love is not always about being together physically. Sometimes it is about carrying someone in your heart while still walking your own path with integrity. And that kind of love is rare. It does not scream. It does not beg. It does not create chaos. It exists quietly. It exists powerfully. It stays in the background of your life, shaping your decisions, strengthening your character, reminding you that you are capable of feeling something real without needing to possess it. And yes, it hurts. It hurts in ways that are difficult to explain. Because it is not a simple heartbreak. It is not something you can easily label or forget. It becomes a constant presence. A quiet "what if" that lives inside your chest. A connection that does not fade even when you try to ignore it. But at the same time, it gives you a strange kind of peace. Because you know that what you felt was real. It was not forced. It was not imagined. It was something deep. Something rare. Something that changed you. And maybe that is the point. Maybe God does not always align you with your soulmate so you can live happily ever after with them. Maybe sometimes, He aligns you with them so you can learn the hardest lesson of all. That love and possession are not the same. That you can love someone deeply and still choose what is right over what is easy. That you can walk away not because you did not care, but because you cared enough not to destroy lives, including your own. And in that choice, in that quiet act of strength, you become a different person. Someone stronger. Someone deeper. Someone who understands that real love is not selfish. It does not demand a place where it does not belong. It honors boundaries. It respects commitments. Even when it breaks your own heart in the process. And maybe one day, you will look back at this moment and realize that this alignment was never about losing something. It was about becoming someone. Someone who knows that even the most painful connections can have a purpose. Someone who understands that sometimes the most powerful love stories are not the ones that end in togetherness, but the ones that teach you how to love with honesty, with patience, and with the courage to let go when holding on would mean losing yourself, and even after all of that, after you convince yourself to stay strong, to respect the boundaries, to choose what is right over what feels right, the truth is the connection does not simply disappear. It lingers. It stays in the quiet corners of your mind, in the pauses between your daily routines, in the moments when everything around you slows down and you are left alone with your thoughts. You begin to notice how deeply this person has imprinted on your soul, not in loud or obvious ways, but in subtle shifts, in the way you now understand emotions, in the way you see love, in the way you have become more aware of your own depth. It changes you. And that is what makes it so difficult to move on, because you are not just letting go of a person, you are trying to detach from a feeling that felt like truth, like something your heart recognized before your mind could even process it. There is a certain kind of silence that comes with this kind of love. Not the empty silence of absence, but a heavy, meaningful silence filled with everything that was never said, everything that could never be expressed openly, everything that had to be held back out of respect for reality. And that silence becomes your companion. You carry conversations in your head that never happened. You replay moments that were small on the surface but felt infinite in meaning. You hold on to glances, words, and emotions that no one else would understand the way you do. And sometimes you question yourself. You wonder if it was all in your head. You wonder if maybe you made it bigger than it actually was. But deep down, you know the truth. You know what you felt. You know how rare it was. And that is why it stays. Not as something that controls you, but as something that quietly lives within you, shaping who you are becoming. Over time, you start to realize that this kind of connection was never meant to be easy to carry. It was meant to challenge you. It was meant to force you to grow in ways that comfort never could. Because anyone can love when it is convenient, when it is accepted, when it fits perfectly into their life. But it takes a different kind of strength to love when you cannot have, when you must step back, when you must choose distance even though your heart wants closeness. That is where your character is built. That is where you discover who you really are. And slowly, without even realizing it, you begin to evolve. Your understanding of love becomes deeper. You stop chasing shallow connections. You stop settling for things that do not feel real. Because once you have felt something so genuine, even if it was complicated, even if it was incomplete, you cannot go back to pretending that surface-level emotions are enough. You become more patient, more aware, more intentional. And at the same time, there is a quiet sadness that stays with you. Not a loud pain, not something that consumes you every day, but a soft, constant ache that reminds you of what could have been. It does not break you, but it humbles you. It makes you realize that life is not always about getting what you want. Sometimes it is about understanding why you cannot have it. And in that understanding, there is growth. There is maturity. There is a kind of peace that does not come from fulfillment, but from acceptance. You begin to accept that some people are meant to be felt, not held. Some connections are meant to touch your life, not stay in it. And that does not make them any less meaningful. If anything, it makes them even more powerful. Because they existed without guarantees, without promises, without a clear future. They existed purely in the present, in the depth of emotion, in the honesty of what was felt, even if it could not be acted upon. And maybe that is what makes it so unforgettable. Because it was never about possession. It was never about building a life together in the traditional sense. It was about something deeper. Something spiritual. Something that changed the way you see yourself and the world around you. And as time moves forward, you start to rebuild yourself around this understanding. You learn how to live with it, not as a burden, but as a part of your story. You stop resisting it. You stop asking, why me, or why now? Instead, you begin to ask, what is this teaching me? And that shift changes everything. Because now, instead of feeling like a victim of timing or circumstances, you start to see yourself as someone who was trusted with a rare experience. A difficult one, yes. A painful one, definitely. But also a meaningful one. One that not everyone gets to feel. One that forces you to rise above your impulses, above your desires, and choose something greater. And that choice, that quiet decision to honor what is right even when it hurts, becomes a defining part of who you are. It shapes your future relationships. It shapes the way you love. It shapes the way you carry yourself. You become someone who understands that love is not just about receiving, it is about giving in the purest form, even if that giving means letting go. And one day, when you are further down your path, when life has settled in ways you cannot yet see, you will look back at this connection with a different kind of emotion. Not just pain. Not just longing. But gratitude. Gratitude for what it taught you. Gratitude for how it changed you. Gratitude for the way it opened your heart and then taught you how to protect it with wisdom instead of fear. You will realize that this was never a mistake. It was never a cruel twist of fate. It was a moment of alignment that was not meant to give you a person, but to give you a version of yourself that you could not have become otherwise. And even though a part of you may always carry them, it will no longer feel heavy. It will feel like a quiet memory. A chapter that did not last forever, but left a permanent mark on your soul. And in that realization, you will finally understand that sometimes the deepest love you experience is not the one you get to keep, but the one that teaches you how to become someone worthy of the love that is still meant for you. And even after you reach that point, where acceptance begins to replace resistance and understanding slowly takes the place of confusion, there are still moments that catch you off guard. Moments where everything feels calm on the surface but something inside you suddenly shifts, and you find yourself thinking about them again, not because you are stuck in the past, but because some connections do not follow the rules of time. They do not fade in a straight line, they come and go like waves, sometimes distant and quiet, sometimes intense and overwhelming, and in those moments you realize that healing is not about forgetting, it is about learning how to remember without falling apart. It is about carrying something heavy in a way that no longer breaks you, and that is not an easy thing to do. It takes time, it takes patience. It takes countless nights of sitting with your own thoughts, trying to make sense of emotions that do not have clear answers, trying to accept a story that never reached the ending you once imagined, and yet, somewhere along that journey, you begin to notice a quiet strength forming within you, a kind of emotional depth that was not there before, a resilience that does not come from avoiding pain, but from facing it fully and still choosing to move forward. And that is when you start to understand that maybe this connection was never meant to be a destination, maybe it was always meant to be a turning point, a moment in your life that would shift the way you see love, the way you see yourself, the way you understand what truly matters, because before this, maybe you believed that love was about finding someone who fits perfectly into your life, someone who stays, someone who chooses you without complications. And while that kind of love does exist, this experience shows you another side of it, a deeper, more complex side, where love is not always convenient, not always easy, not always something you can hold on to, and yet it is still real, still powerful, still capable of changing you in ways nothing else can. And as you grow through this, you start to become more aware of your own boundaries, your own values, your own sense of self. You realize that no matter how strong a connection feels, it should not come at the cost of your integrity, it should not require you to lose yourself, and that realization is painful but necessary, because it teaches you that love is not just about emotion, it is also about choice, about responsibility, about understanding the consequences of your actions and choosing to act with awareness rather than impulse. And that kind of maturity does not come easily. It is built through experiences like this, through moments where your heart wants one thing and your mind knows another, through situations where there is no perfect answer, only the choice that aligns with who you want to become. And every time you choose with integrity, even when it hurts, you are shaping your future self. You are becoming someone who can be trusted, not just by others, but by yourself. And that is a powerful thing, because when you trust yourself, when you know that you will not betray your own values even in the face of strong emotions, you begin to feel a different kind of peace, not the peace that comes from having everything you want, but the peace that comes from knowing you are living in alignment with your truth. And slowly, that peace starts to outweigh the pain, not completely, not all at once, but gradually, like a quiet shift that happens over time. And as that happens, your perspective begins to change. You no longer see this connection as something that was taken from you, you start to see it as something that was given to you for a reason, something that expanded your emotional capacity, something that showed you what it means to feel deeply without needing to control the outcome. And that is a rare lesson, because most people go through life trying to hold on to everything, trying to make every meaningful connection last, trying to avoid loss at all costs. But you, through this experience, learn something different. You learn that sometimes the most meaningful connections are not the ones that stay, but the ones that transform you, the ones that challenge you to grow, the ones that force you to confront parts of yourself that you might have otherwise ignored. And that kind of growth is not comfortable. It does not happen in moments of ease. It happens in moments of conflict, in moments of uncertainty, in moments where you are forced to choose between what feels good and what is right, and every time you make that choice, you are building a stronger version of yourself, a version that is not easily shaken, a version that understands that life is not always fair, not always simple, but still worth living with honesty and purpose. And as you continue on your path, you will meet new people, you will experience new connections, and they will feel different, not because they are less meaningful, but because you are different now. You carry a deeper awareness, a stronger sense of self, a clearer understanding of what you truly need and what you are willing to accept, and that will guide you in ways you cannot fully see yet. It will help you recognize the difference between fleeting attraction and genuine connection, between temporary comfort and lasting compatibility, between love that consumes you and love that supports you. And when the right person does come into your life, you will be able to meet them from a place of wholeness rather than longing, from a place of strength rather than need, and that is when you will truly understand the purpose of everything you went through, because it was not just about that one connection, it was about preparing you for something greater, something healthier, something that aligns not only with your heart but also with your life. And even then, even when you have moved forward, even when you have built something new, there may still be a small part of you that remembers, that reflects, that occasionally wonders about the path not taken, but it will no longer feel like a wound. It will feel like a memory, a quiet reminder of a time when you were faced with a difficult kind of love and chose to grow instead of break, and that choice, more than anything else, will define you. It will stay with you as a symbol of your strength, your depth, your ability to love with honesty and restraint, and in the end, that is what truly matters, not whether the connection lasted, not whether it turned into the story you once imagined, but whether it helped you become someone who can love deeply, choose wisely, and walk away with dignity when necessary, because that is not weakness, that is strength in its purest form. And that is the kind of strength that will carry you through every chapter of your life, no matter what comes next, and even beyond that point, when life starts to feel stable again and your emotions are no longer as overwhelming as they once were. There comes a phase that very few people talk about, a phase where everything looks normal from the outside, but inside you carry a quiet depth that was carved out by everything you went through. And in that depth there is both strength and softness. There is a new awareness that changes how you see every interaction, every connection, every feeling that tries to enter your life. Because once you have experienced something so real yet so complicated, you can no longer approach love in a careless or naive way. You begin to notice the difference between people who are just present and people who are truly connected to you. You become more selective, not out of ego but out of understanding, because now you know how much emotions can shape your inner world. You know how deeply someone can affect your peace, your thoughts, your sense of self, and that knowledge makes you more intentional. You stop giving your energy to things that feel empty. You stop chasing validation from people who cannot meet you at your level of depth, and instead you start building a life that feels aligned with who you have become, and that alignment is quiet. It does not need to be announced. It shows in your choices, in your boundaries, in the way you carry yourself. And yet, even in this phase of growth, there are moments when your heart revisits what once was, not with the same intensity, not with the same ache, but with a gentle curiosity, like flipping through an old chapter of your life and recognizing the person you used to be. And in those moments you might realize how much you have changed. how much stronger you have become, how much clearer your understanding is now, and that realization brings a kind of peace that is difficult to explain, because it is not based on getting what you once wanted, it is based on becoming someone who no longer needs it in the same way, and that is a powerful shift, because it means you are no longer defined by that connection, you are shaped by it, but not controlled by it. It becomes a part of your story, not the center of your identity. And that distinction is what allows you to truly move forward, not by erasing the past, but by integrating it into your growth, and as you continue to live your life, you will start to notice that the lessons you learn begin to show up in unexpected ways, in how you handle difficult situations, in how you respond to emotional challenges, in how you treat others and how you allow others to treat you, and that is when you understand that nothing you went through was wasted, every emotion, every moment of confusion, every sleepless night, every internal battle, all of it contributed to the person you are becoming, and that person is more grounded, more aware, more capable of handling the complexities of life with maturity and grace, and that does not mean life suddenly becomes easy, it does not mean you will never feel pain again, but it does mean that you now have a deeper foundation, a stronger sense of self that will help you navigate whatever comes next, and that is something no one can take away from you, because it was built through your own experience, your own choices, your own willingness to face something difficult without losing yourself in the process, and as time continues to move forward, you may find yourself in new situations that test you again, new connections that bring their own challenges, and in those moments you will have a choice. You can either repeat old patterns or you can apply what you have learned, and that is where your growth becomes visible, in the way you choose differently, in the way you prioritize your peace, in the way you recognize when something is not right for you and have the courage to step back before it consumes you, and that kind of awareness is not something everyone has, it is something that is earned, something that comes from going through experiences that force you to grow, and while those experiences may not feel fair in the moment, they shape you in ways that comfort never could, and eventually, you begin to see your life not as a series of random events, but as a journey that is guiding you towards something meaningful, something that aligns not just with your desires, but with your values, your purpose, your sense of integrity, and that is when everything starts to make sense in a different way, not perfectly, not completely, but enough for you to trust the process, enough for you to stop resisting what has already happened and start focusing on what you can create moving forward. And in that space, you find a new kind of freedom, a freedom that does not come from having everything you want, but from being at peace with what is, from knowing that you have the strength to handle whatever life brings, from trusting that even the most difficult moments have a purpose, and as you continue to walk your path with that mindset, you will notice that your life begins to reflect that inner peace, your relationships become healthier, your decisions become clearer, your sense of self becomes more stable. And all of this is connected to that one experience that once felt so confusing, so painful, so difficult to understand, and that is the beauty of growth. It takes something that once felt like a burden and turns it into a source of strength, something that once made you question everything and turns it into something that helps you understand yourself more deeply. And in the end, you realize that this journey was never about losing or gaining a person, it was about finding yourself, about becoming someone who can stand in their own truth, someone who can feel deeply without losing control, someone who can love without losing their sense of self, and that is the kind of person who is ready for whatever comes next, not because life will be perfect, but because they have built the strength to face it with clarity, with honesty, and with a quiet confidence that comes from knowing exactly who they are and what they stand for. and when you finally reach the last stretch of this journey, you begin to understand something that once felt impossible to accept. That closure does not always come from a final conversation, it does not always come from clear answers or perfectly wrapped endings. Sometimes closure is something you create within yourself, something that grows quietly over time as you make peace with what happened and, more importantly, with what could not happen, and in that realization there is a deep sense of calm that slowly replaces the restlessness you once carried. Because you are no longer searching for explanations, you are no longer trying to rewrite the story in your head, you are no longer holding on to the hope that things might somehow change. Instead you begin to see everything as it is, clearly, honestly, without illusion, and that clarity is not harsh, it is freeing, it allows you to breathe again without the weight of unanswered questions, it allows you to move forward without feeling like you are leaving something unfinished behind, because you understand now that not every story is meant to be completed in the way you once imagined. Some stories are meant to be experienced, felt deeply, and then gently released, and as you accept that, you start to feel a quiet gratitude, not just for the connection itself, but for who you became because of it, because if you look closely, you will see that you are no longer the same person who first experienced those emotions, you are someone who has grown, someone who has faced inner conflict and chosen integrity, someone who has learned how to sit with difficult feelings without letting them control your actions, and that kind of growth is rare. It is not something that comes easily, it is something that is built through moments of discomfort, through choices that test your character, through situations where there is no easy path, only the right one, and you chose that path, even when it hurt, even when it felt like you were losing something important. And in reality, you were not losing. You were evolving, you were becoming someone stronger. Someone more grounded. Someone who understands that real love is not just about emotion, it is about responsibility, about respect, about knowing when to step back instead of stepping in, and that understanding will stay with you for the rest of your life. It will guide you in ways you may not even notice. It will shape your future in quiet but powerful ways, and one day, when you find yourself in a place where everything feels right, where your life aligns naturally with your values and your heart feels at peace, you will look back at this chapter not with pain, but with a soft sense of respect, because you will recognize how important it was, how necessary it was for your growth, and how it prepared you for the life you are living now. And maybe, just maybe, you will also realize that the idea of a soulmate was never as simple as you once thought. Maybe a soulmate is not always the person you end up with. Maybe sometimes a soulmate is the person who awakens you, who changes you, who shows you a depth of emotion that transforms your understanding of love, even if they are not meant to stay in your life forever. And that does not make the connection any less real. If anything, it makes it more meaningful, because it existed without conditions, without guarantees, without a clear future. It existed purely in its truth, and that is something rare, something that not everyone gets to experience. And as you carry that understanding with you, you begin to approach life differently, you become less afraid of deep emotions, less afraid of vulnerability, because you know that even if something does not last, it can still have value, it can still shape you in positive ways, and that awareness gives you a kind of strength that is calm, not loud, not forceful, but steady, reliable, something that you can lean on no matter what happens next. And in the end, that is what this whole journey was about. Not about holding on to someone, not about forcing a connection to fit into your life, but about discovering who you are when faced with something real and difficult, about learning how to love without losing your integrity, about understanding that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is walk away with respect for yourself and for others, and as you take that final step forward, leaving this chapter behind not with regret but with acceptance, you realize that you are no longer searching for something to complete you. You are already whole, already enough, already capable of building a life that is meaningful and aligned with who you are, and that realization is the true ending, not an ending filled with loss, but one filled with growth, clarity, and a quiet confidence that no matter what the future holds, you will face it with the same strength, the same honesty, and the same depth that brought you through this journey, and that, more than anything else, is what makes this story complete.